Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Race's Investor Briefing. My name's Jane Lowe, and it's a pleasure to support Race on Investor Relations and also to be your moderator for this call today. So first up, I'll say hello to our panelists, starting with Dr. Daniel Tillett, who was appointed CEO of Race yesterday. Firstly, good morning to you, Daniel.
Good morning, Jane, and good morning, all shareholders.
Good morning. I'll also welcome to the call Dr. Pete Smith, who you may know was appointed as a director earlier in the year and stepped into the executive director role in August. Good morning to you also, Pete.
Good morning, Jane. Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. Okay, so what we'll do first this morning is have a quick chat with Daniel about his appointment into the CEO role, also with Pete about how the roles will work together, and then we'll turn to the strategy presentation, which was released yesterday to the ASX. Within that deck, we'll also address Race's overarching clinical strategy and talk to the bonus loyalty option issue. I'm sure shareholders will have questions and other investors as well, perhaps. Indeed, we've already received some, and we'll get through as many as we can today. So a reminder on the housekeeping front, if you'd like to ask a question, please do so using the Q&A function in the Zoom ribbon at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to them when we're at the end of the presentation. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to focus attention first on Dr. Daniel Tillett. So congratulations again, Daniel, congratulations rather on your appointment as CEO. It was big news yesterday. And you've obviously had a long-standing history with Race, originally as a significant shareholder, then as CSO and executive director. You stepped out in March from the executive role and returned in August to work on the strategy with the team. So what made this a good time to rejoin Race and indeed this time as CEO?
Race needed stability. It needs somebody who's familiar with the background, the detail, who could take it forward through what is a really exciting time for Race. We've got a lot of activities going on. We've got a lot of activities planned. And need somebody there who can guide it through. I can come in, hit the ground running. There's no ramp up time. I'm 100% committed. I'm the largest shareholder, and I want to see Race succeed, both for the shareholders as a shareholder and also for the patients. I think Bisantrene is an amazing drug, and it really should be, back on the market and helping patients as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's a good message. Okay, and how are you feeling about being in the role of CEO?
It's somewhat daunting, only because there's so much to be done, but at the same time it's exciting. So that works both ways. But it's something I'm aware of what's ahead of us, and I'm happy to be involved to help that through that time. And if I succeed, we all succeed. So it's a win for everyone. Yeah, so I'm focused on the future, not looking to the past, and let's just get on with doing what needs to get done.
Okay, great. Well, speaking of Pete, I'll bring you in here too. So you and Daniel are working together in an executive capacity. Can you talk a bit about how you see the two roles working together?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Daniel and I have been working together over the past couple of months, working on the strategy with the team. It's a whole team of people at Race who've been working on this, a very, very impressive team, I have to say. I can say that having joined fairly recently. And I think our roles are very complementary. I don't think there's anybody on the planet who knows more about Bisantrene than Daniel. Fingers and ears, Daniel. He's a very, very intelligent human being who's fizzing with ideas. And what I bring to this is I've been in the industry effectively for 35 years in various capacities, financial and investment banking, and then the past 27 years in C-suite roles, CFO, mainly CEO roles, mainly involved in oncology drug development. And so I think I bring clearly grey hairs, although there are a few of them as the years go by. But I think working together or continuing to work together as we have been, I think we can have a very productive relationship there. And again, it's really about the broader team as well. It's not just the two of us. So looking forward to it. I think it's going to be very complementary.
Okay, well, it's terrific for Race to have access to both of your capabilities and skill sets. And I know perhaps with the role change, your shirts have merged somewhat together as well, away from the team to the
Yes.
formal
The
shirt.
shareholders who know the old colourful shirts, I put on a boring white one for today.
Okay, leveling up. All right, so with that, let's now kick off the formal run through of the strategy presentation. Again, that was released to ASX yesterday. For anyone that's joining by phone, note it's also available via the Race website at raceoncology.com. And with that, Daniel, I will ask you to screen share, and over to you.
Thank you, Jane. I'm just going to pull up the laser pointer. So welcome, everyone. This is quite a detailed investor update. It has a lot of technical detail, but a lot of this is important to have a good understanding about why we went about the things we did, why we made changes, and in some ways, how this relates to what Race has been working on for a long time. It's not really a completely change in strategy. It's really more of a focus in on the core value that Race has discovered over the last few years, pretty much since the discovery of cardioprotection. The whole purpose of this puts us at the heart of cancer care, a nice phrase that captures sort of what Race is about. I'll leave you to read this thrilling slide at your leisure. I really want to concentrate on the sort of the strategic principles that we went as a team. This sort of set the guideposts by how we were going to come about the various strategic plan, update to the strategic plan. What are the sorts of things that were most important that we ensured that we actually achieved that outcome? First thing is we do this for the shareholders and the patients. We really at all times need to keep that in mind. It's not, Race is not for management. It's not for the employees, it's for the shareholders and the patients. And so they have to come first. We have to recognise where the major commercial opportunities for Race are. Race has had sort of, in some ways, is blessed, but also creates difficulties as we have lots and lots of different opportunities that we could pursue. In fact, if I had access to, $500 million, I could spend it all on various activities. But we have to really focus in on what are the core things that give us the most value. And they are cardioprotection with anti-cancer activity in solid tumours, M6A RNA or FTO, and AML, which is somewhat a legacy, but more recently has become a more exciting opportunity going forward. The other key driver is to recognise where we want to get to, what we want to achieve from all the clinical trials, all the money that we spend, all of your money that we spend, is to ensure that we demonstrate clinical efficacy for each of the various activities that we want to partner or transact on. And that will drive the maximum return on shareholder equity. You can take a drug all the way through to market, and that will cost a lot of money, but you can focus on getting the drug a long way down the path of clinical development, de-risking it, and then looking for partners or sales to take it the rest of the way. It's a standard model within the biotech industry, works very well and returns to shareholders the best return. And the one that's probably less positive is the state of capital markets for biotech at the moment, particularly small and medium biotechs. It's an incredibly challenging time. Valuations are down considerably. Capital is incredibly expensive and hard to come by. And many of you are invested in other biotechs and have seen capital raises done in the last 12 months that have really smashed and had to be done at extremely high discounts and large numbers of free options given away in order to achieve that. So it's really important that we design all our clinical goals so that we are within the available resources of the company, and we don't commit to a program without the resources to complete that. Let's just give you a quick brief overview of Race Oncology. Some of you are new to Race, some of you have been there since 2016. Started out as to bring bisantrene back as an orphan drug treatment in acute myeloid leukemia, initially to sell into Europe as a named patient program. things really changed a great deal in 2021, where we discovered that bisantrene was not only less cardiotoxic than other anthracyclines, and that's been known for decades, but that it can protect the heart from the damage caused by anthracyclines like doxorubicin, while also increasing the anti-cancer activity. That's a really powerful combination and generated enormous potential value creation. In 2022, we were able to reformulate bisantrene so we could overcome the historical problems with delivery. So previously, bisantrene had to be given via a central line. These days, with RC220, we have the ability to deliver it by peripheral IV. And our mission is to advance bisantrene in the clinic for cardioprotection, prove out the M6A hypothesis, and focus on AML with the aim of undertaking a pharma partner or transaction. Don't really need to introduce bisantrene. It's very well studied molecule. It's been around for a long time, been in over 50 clinical trials. There's lots of papers out there. In fact, when I first came to race, it took me ages to actually get up to speed on race because there's so much published. It's been in over 1,500 patients. It's got an excellent safety profile. It's known to be less cardiotoxic, and it has complementary mechanisms of action around cardioprotective and chemotherapeutic. Really quite an amazing series of properties, considering the molecule itself is quite a simple looking molecule. One of the discoveries we made is that we have a combined activity of bisantrene across a wide range of different cancers. There's 143 different cancer cell lines. Basically, bisantrene works almost across all of them at clinically relevant concentrations. And it also improved the cell killing activity. So it works additively with anthracycline. So you can imagine you give patient doxorubicin, you can give them bisantrene on top of that and get a better anti-cancer effect. The really, I guess, amazing discovery that was made in 2021 was that you can actually protect the hearts of mice and also human heart cells from the damage caused by anthracyclines. This is a huge problem. I'll talk a little bit more about it going later on, but it really opens up solving one of the the most difficult problems in chemotherapy: how to prevent the damage that occurs to patients through the effective treatments. Mentioned a little bit about RC220. This is this new formulation. This is probably the most value add activity that Race has done since it was founded. And this was to be able to reformulate, regenerate new strong IP, solve the historical problems, move it from being kind of a niche targeted drug, only limited to a small number of indications, to something that can be used broadly across the entire oncology market, all different cancer types. This comes, obviously, there are all the really positives. The downside is you have to take it through the non-clinical toxicology and safety package, which we're underway, due in Q2 of next year. Also have to remanufacture it, which is going well, it's underway, and expected to be delivered in Q1. So we expect to have RC220, this new formulation with a very long patent life, very broadly usable in the second half of 2024 to 4 clinical trials. So what are the opportunities? One thing that I think that many people who are not in the industry or are not oncologists, which I assume is the vast majority of you listening, is how effective and enduring the anthracyclines are. If you talk to oncologists, they, as much as they dislike the side effects that come with these drugs, they recognize that they're very effective. And they're very effective in the majority of patients where they have no targeted agent. So targeted agents, immunotherapy, are all the rage, I guess, in modern oncology treatment, but they're really limited to a small subset. So a couple of studies done by the NCI, the National Cancer Institute in the US, where they went looking for cross patients. Can they find, through using genomic screening and other techniques, can they find a targeted agent for cancer patients? And they found in less than 20% of patients they could find. And those patients, the 80% that there's no targeted drug for, they will have to continue to rely on broad-acting chemotherapeutic drugs like the anthracyclines. And there is no possibility that these are going to go away in the near future, in the foreseeable future. We're talking decades before the targeted agents or immunotherapies have any chance of displacing them. So they're, in some ways, a necessary evil. They work, they're effective, and they're going to be with us. So we have to make them better. This gives an indication of how widely they're used, on-label use, what they're licensed for, and a lot of off-label use for these drugs. They've been around for many decades. They're very effective. Oncologists understand them well, but they really do come with a lot of problems. Used widely all around the world. Over 20 million doses given every year. It's it's 4 to 5 million patients minimum. These are very conservative numbers generated by Triangle. Most people are assuming that they're declining, but if you actually look at the use, they've continued to rise year after year as the patient population grows, as patients get older, and as there are more people, and particularly in less developed countries, as people get richer, they can afford more treatment. They're living long enough to suffer from cancer. The real problems, obviously, anthracyclines come with a lot of different problems, including myelosuppression and nausea and gastro issues. But the real problem that everyone fears is cardiotoxicity. So the heart is very sensitive to anthracyclines. If you give patients too much anthracycline, you can permanently damage the heart. The heart has no regenerative capacity. Once it's damaged, it just doesn't get better on its own. So it doesn't have the ability to recover from the damage that these drugs cause. Obviously, oncologists are aware of this, and they've changed their practices to try and reduce and minimize that damage. And so they exclude patients that have cardiac risk factors from treatment with anthracyclines. They reduce the lifetime dosing and the dosing levels. And they've been able to get the acute, what's called the clinically defined cardiotoxicity rate down to quite a small number, about 2%, compared to sort of in historical times, it would be 10, 20%. So that's good, but there's still a lot of damage going on, which is considered what's called subclinical. And this is really a consequence of the way that cardiac damage is measured in the clinic. Currently, you hook the patient up to an instrument, you measure their heart whilst they're sitting in a chair or lying on a bed. And the heart at that point is not under much strain. It has lots of spare capacity in comparison. But when you start to look at the heart, when it has to actually work hard under load, then you start to see that the damage there is far more significant. And this was discovered just recently by the Baker Institute. They weren't looking for this. They were looking for something else completely, but they tripped over it. And a shareholder sent it to me earlier in the year and said, you might be interested in this. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this is amazing. This actually solves so many problems. And what the Baker Institute identified was that whilst the damage to the patient's heart, when the patient's at rest, is very minimal, almost unmeasurable, when they put the patient on one of these treadmills, which you can see there on the right, which is basically walking for 6 minutes briskly, they can detect there's been a lot of damage done to the heart. It's called VO2 peak or VO2 max, a similar measure. And they found there that actually a large percentage of the patients were functionally disabled. They weren't able to do things like be able to equivalent of walk up the stairs or walk to the shops, and that they could identify a very large change in the VO2 peak performance levels in a large percentage of the patients, 43%, almost half the patients. This VO2 peak is a well-recognized endpoint in cardiology, or not only outside of oncology, and it's really important for patient quality of life. So if you suffer severe reduction in your VO2 peak levels, you cannot do many of the things you could do before you were treated. And it's very common, for example, for patients who may have been active gardeners can no longer continue to do that. And this is what really matters to a patient. It's not, whether their LVEF, a measure of cardiac function drops by 2% or 1%. That doesn't really mean anything to a patient. But if they can't do the things that they love in life, then it's a really serious problem. So this is really important for race, because not only is it very common, very easy to measure, and occurs at a very high rate, meaning you can detect it in small numbers of patients, it's something that really matters to patients and matters to regulators. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the slide. Obviously, as I mentioned before, anthracyclines are really widely used, and this is despite the cardiotoxic risks. And this strong clinical interest, this came out of the Triangle report, where they surveyed 16 different clinicians across a wide range, from KOLs to community clinicians, about what were they most concerned about. And cardiotoxicity was right at the top of their concerns. This is the thing that prevents them from, or makes them think about not using a drug they know is very effective, because they're really concerned about cardiotoxicity. So there's a great need and a great interest, which is important. This was reflected in some of the work that was done earlier in the year, speaking to key opinion leaders. There's really strong interest from the key opinion leaders in this problem. They recognize this is a problem, and there needs to be things that will change treatment and ensure that patients, don't suffer this long-term damage to their heart. Now, these guys and women are, really top of the game. These are the sorts of people who don't come out and say something like this unless they mean it, unless they're excited by what bisantrene has to offer. Just want to touch on a little bit on the regulators. So this is obviously the key opinion leaders, the clinicians. The regulators are really concerned about this problem too. There's been a general trend within oncology to be really focused on patient quality of life issues. The good old days of just treating the cancer and not worrying about what happened to the patient are gone. It's really critically important these days that your drug impacts the patient's quality of life as little as possible, and really to minimize the serious side effects. So Project Optimus is around ensuring the right dosing is used. So often many oncology drugs are used at too high a dose that just give lots of side effects and little additional benefit. But it's part of a greater theme where just across the entire space, clinicians, KOLs, regulators, pharmaceutical companies, everyone's focused on patient quality of life and ensuring oncology treatment doesn't cause more problems than it solves. It really puts it, I put it in there as a quote, just puts race in the right place at the right time. 10 years ago, this wasn't as much of a concern. In 20 years' time, it may not be important, but right now we're in the right place at the right time. And I think we're incredibly lucky, both as management, but also as shareholders, to be having this opportunity. Many of you will have seen the Triangle report that was released in April, looking at the market potential. This is very conservative research done by Triangle, who are a primary market research firm. They put their name to this. They went through and they cut, I think, every single assumption they could take the most conservative estimates on, and they came up with what are frankly very large numbers. The potential is there. And this is just for breast cancer in the USA alone, a tiny slice of the market. If you look more broadly across all the different indications for both cardioprotection and cardioprotection plus anti-cancer, you're talking very large numbers. This is annual revenue. And you see how annual revenue translates into valuation. And you're looking at multiples of 3 to 5. We're talking a very valuable drug, potentially, if we deliver on what we want to do. Many of you are very excited, like me, about the M6A RNA system that was discovered from the City of Hope back in 2020. Really did change the whole perception around what bisantrene could offer. M6A is really exciting. If you're a scientist in this space, you go, wow, this is just amazing stuff. There's paper after paper coming out every year. Seems to be involved in pretty much every sort of disease that's out there, particularly what are called sort of metabolic diseases, obesity, reproductive, cardiac, cancer, everything anyone's looked at, there seems to be there. And it's a regulatory system that sort of controls a step in the process of how a cell works. Every regulatory system that's been discovered inside a cell has turned out to be important in cancer, and M6A is no different. Creates an amazing opportunity, but the problem with this opportunity is it's very new, very exciting. There's a lot of unknowns, and particularly there's nothing really known about the clinical importance, and that's because we just don't have drugs that can target this pathway. Bisantrene may be potentially one of these drugs, but we need to go into the clinic and really prove this out before we can really say anything about how big this is. So you can think of this as potentially massive blue sky opportunity, but it needs to be proven in the clinic. AML, I guess this is where race began and where Bisantrene was most successful. Managed to make it all the way through to approval in France in 1988. It was never marketed because Ledley decided to not take the drug forward. We've run a couple of trials ourselves, or in collaboration with investigators in Israel, Sheba 1, which showed a 40% response rate, Sheba 2, which also showed, coincidentally, a 40% response rate in patients that by Australian standards would not really be considered clinical material. They would be here in Australia, they get palliative care only, very advanced patients. This data really has sparked a lot of interest from other clinicians. They understand how difficult these patients are to treat. They know that Bisantrene is a special drug that can actually work in this particular indication where we do need improved treatments. AMLs are very difficult to treat cancer. Problem with AML is there's a large number of commercial challenges that make it very difficult to develop a drug. And the most important one is the very crowded clinical market for a orphan indication. There are not that many AML patients around the world, which is a very good thing because it's such a terrible disease. But when you have a lot of companies chasing this one indication, it becomes very competitive to get patients or clinician time. And the competition for patients is ludicrously intense. There are more than 800 clinical trials open globally. And in Australia, which is a fairly small market, and there's not that many AML patients, around 1,000, there's 60 clinical trials open for treating AML in Australia, which is, considering that most patients can't handle the rigor of a clinical trial or don't wish to participate in a clinical trial, it's quite a crowded competition. In fact, it's impossible to open a sponsored trial here in Australia anymore in AML. It's just too competitive. Investigators just won't take on new drugs. The other thing that makes it really difficult is venetoclax, which is a new drug in AML. It's proven to be incredibly effective and is now becoming the standard of care for AML patients. It's far less intense. It's much better tolerated. This opens up the opportunity to treat a wider range of patients who can't handle high-intensity chemotherapy. And there's been a big shift in the clinician interest, the marketplace. So the commercial opportunity is moving away from high-intensity chemotherapy protocols, like the way that Bisantrene historically was used and how it was used in the recent Sheba 1 and 2 trials, towards low-intensity protocols. So if you don't have a drug that can be utilized in low-intensity protocols and be compatible around venetoclax, then you don't have a commercially viable drug. So these are some really difficult problems, hurdles in the place of AML, but they're not insurmountable. And finally, just to give a bit of background here is around the FDA fast track and breakthrough designation. So as I mentioned before, the FDA is very interested in bringing drugs to market as quickly as possible that benefit patients' quality of life. And they have various mechanisms of doing this called fast track and breakthrough designation. And these, if you want to know more about these, they're in the appendix. But these really basically can accelerate the development of a drug and bring it to market much earlier in the development process. Instead of after having to treat thousands of patients and run 2 phase 3 trials, you can get very rapid approval. And a good example for this is a drug called Cosela. It's a IV CDK4/6 inhibitor. There's plenty of other CDK4/6 inhibitors that are oral that are on the market. And it was designed to reduce chemotherapy-induced myelosuppression. So chemotherapy damages the bone marrow, makes you prone to getting infections. And the CDK4/6 in small cell lung cancer, luckily not the major lung cancer, it's a suitable target to go after. So they were able to accelerate really quickly through to approval. In 2016, they ran their first phase 1 safety trial, work out the dose. They ran 3 phase 1b/2 trials through 2017, 2019. The FDA saw what they were doing, thought it was fantastic, gave them breakthrough designation, which means they got really behind the company, really pushed it along. They got senior managers involved, gave them all the guidance that they need. And then they submitted their NDA, new drug application, received priority review, which means that they'll push it through the whole process. And they were granted accelerated approval in 2021. And this was done off the base of 3 phase 2 trials of 120 odd patients that were treated with Cosela. They didn't have to do a huge number of trials. They didn't have to do a huge number of patients. So you can see the power if you have the regulators behind you in a drug that they believe in that will make a difference to patients' life, it can make a big difference. And myelosuppression is vastly down the list of concerns clinicians, as we saw earlier in the slide, compared to cardiotoxicity. That's a much more serious problem and a much wider problem. So it does tell you that there are faster ways of getting drugs to market. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges facing race oncology. We mentioned some of them as we were going along, some around AML, some around the funding position. The funding valuation really is serious. I've termed it nuclear winter. I think it's really severe. And some people, if you speak to veterans, read what they're saying, they're calling it the worst biotech market they've been involved in. Some of them go back into the 80s when biotech first started. So they've lived through lots of ups and downs in the biotech space. It's a very difficult time to be running a biotech company. There are hundreds of biotech companies that are trading under their cash position in the US. There are thousands of private biotech companies that are struggling to get any cash to continue, desperate for anything. As a consequence of that, many of the deals that have been closing, while the late stage have been holding up fairly well, so those with approved drugs or very close to approved, early stage has really struggled, and a lot of them have been done, they either take a long time to close or they've been done at near liquidation prices. So some of them I've seen some deals done where it's basically the pharmaceutical company bought the whole division out for the cash in the bank. Pretty good deal for them. Obviously, AML, extremely crowded market, and M6A, while it's really exciting, is really unproven. So these are all the challenges, the serious challenges that race faces. So, what can we do about it? Well, we can really make sure that we run our programs as efficiently as possible, and make sure that our spending is within available resources. We can make sure that we generate the type of data that will attract partnership and transaction interest from a large range of different companies. We don't want to be just focused on one company. We want to have competitive tension, and we want to be able to negotiate from a position of strength. The last thing you want to do is go to a pharmaceutical company, Oliver Twist style, and beg for a transaction, because you won't get a very good outcome. You want to be in a position where you can say, no, we're not taking that, come back with something better. So that is important. And the way you achieve that is you have the finance behind you, that you don't need the money, and you have the data behind you that will be interest to a lot of companies. And they're the drivers between getting a good outcome. Make use of investigator-initiated trials to try and do things cost effectively. And that's what we're certainly going to do with AML. And that can generate the data that can then kickstart and catalyze downstream interest and make commercial clinical trials possible. And also make sure that if we're going to chase after something like M6A, that we do this in the most cost-effective manner, and use it by adding it to our other trials to gain the various data that's required to really prove out that this is a viable commercial opportunity. And that's exactly what we've gone about doing. So this is the updated strategy. The aim here is to position bisantrene as a cardioprotective supportive care drug in early clinical trials with prudent value building investment. So we take a thing and we utilize that in early trials, and in later trials we prove out the anti-cancer efficacy. And there's a lot of complexity around that, but that approach allows us to really position ourselves most cost effectively to achieve all the various things we want to do. So bisantrene remains a cardioprotective plus anti-cancer. We go about collecting that data in a way that is most cost effective. We aim to generate this robust, high quality clinical efficacy data for all of the indications we're interested: cardioprotection, M6A, and AML. If we have that data that's super high quality, that everyone knows is high quality, then you've really got something there. Not only you can talk to potential pharma partners about, but also you can talk to the regulators about and get them excited about what you're trying to do. And that's the key to getting things like breakthrough and fast track designation. Obviously, all of these depend, I can't say, talk for the FDA or anything like that, but I can say that we can put together the best possible package that will give them the most confidence that this is something that they want to see on the market as quickly as possible, helping patients. Because remember, every patient, every month or year that goes by, millions of patients that could be benefiting from the protection to their heart that bisantrene may offer will miss out. But it's not an academic type thing. This means real differences to real people. We continue our pharma engagement with large pharma. This was kicked off, has been going for a couple of years, really accelerated in recent times. That will continue, particularly there will be a major focus of Pete's activities. His experience, his background really brings a strength to race that we're really lucky to have someone of Pete's background and experience. Look to segment the market by geographical regions and formulation. We're lucky that there's a drug that's widely used around the world. We have the ability to be able to sell off the rights to the drug in certain limited markets to fund accelerated areas or various other things that really can then, and we can reformulate bisantrene as well to segment up the market. So there's a lot of opportunity in that space to really maximize the returns. And the final thing there is to open an IND in 2024 once we have the non-clinical data package. And that provides us with really maximum strategic flexibility. So we have a partner approaches us, say they want to run a trial, use our drug in one of their trials. We have that ability to be able to do that. And it also acts as a validation. The regulators check your entire data package, and if they're happy, it begins the process of beginning the conversation with the regulators. So far, the conversations we've had with the regulators have been very positive. They were quite interested in what we're doing. And I think that they'll be even more interested once they see some of the things we're proposing to do. Maybe I shouldn't talk for them. I'm suspecting they will. So what does the strategy look like on the clinical side? So the aim is to initially start off with a phase 1A/B trial. This is fully funded from the funds we have in the bank. So we don't need to raise a single cent to fund this through to proof of concept. So we will, at the end of this trial, we'll know the safe dose to use, the optimal dose to use for the phase 2, and we will collect in the phase 1B stage, we will collect proof of concept data around the efficacy of cardioprotection. On top of that, we can make use of a lead-in 7 days. So what we do here is we give the drug 7 days before the combination is given, so before they get doxorubicin plus bisantrene. So 7 days before they get bisantrene on its own, we then monitor the patient, we collect blood basically, and from that we can generate all sorts of different data, particularly around the M6A RNA and the activity of bisantrene as an anti-cancer agent across different cancers. And that's incredibly valuable data, basically collected almost for free. On top of that, of course, there's some cost in doing the assays and so forth, but it's very minimal in the cost of running the trial. So by adding on, we can actually achieve everything. We can achieve the cardioprotection, we can achieve the anti-cancer activity, we can get the things that we need like PK and PD, and we can look at M6A RNA, and both on the body and on the cancer. So it's, really trying to use our brains rather than your wallets to ensure that we get the most bang for the shareholders out of that. So the cost is relatively modest. This is mostly run in Australia, or intended to be mostly run in Australia. Conservatively, based on the top end number, 50 patients, it's $11 million. That's the total cost. We'll get a large fraction of that back through the R&D tax. So it becomes quite a cheap for what we get from that. I can't tell you the precise timeline nor the precise number of patients, and that's because that's part of the downside of a Bayesian trial design. So you can do conventional designs, you will know exactly how many patients you will have in that trial, but you don't know the outcome, and you can often miss endpoints because of that. The Bayesian design is much more efficient, but you give up the certainty around timelines and patient numbers, but you get more certainty around achieving the endpoints that you want. So it's a cleverer way of running trials. And in fact, the regulators tell you to run Bayesian trials, don't run these old-fashioned trials, but they just mean more complexity. You have to involve statisticians at an earlier stage. You have to think a lot more before you start treating patients. But the upside of that is it costs less. You get an answer typically sooner, and you get a more confident answer from the result. So what are the outcomes from this? Really does leverage, all the things that we already know, what we've learnt over the years, what we've developed, build on all the strengths of the company. We will establish, obviously, optimal dose. We'll get proof of concept around cardiac protection. And that's really an important, aspect of that. It also get exploratory data around anti-cancer efficacy in M6A, and really puts together the robust data set that will support the various phase 2 trials that will be run. So talking of the phase 2 trials, we're laying out how this phase 2 trial will run. Obviously, we'll only run this trial if we have funding for it. The piggyback options will fund this trial, assuming at least 75% of them are taken up in 2026. And they will then be able to take bisantrene through to proving in the gold standard double-blinded efficacy data in a range of different indications, particularly with a focus on breast cancer, which is obviously the major market for anthracyclines, plus any cancer that the phase 1 shows up as being really effective. So they're the best ones to go after. You use the phase 1 data to guide you into the phase 2. You can run multiple phase 2 parallel streams and collect data across that range. You have at the end of that a data set that a regulator can look at and feel comfortable. Yes, we could actually give accelerated approval to this drug based on this data set. We feel this is really the top quality data. Everything's been done correctly, and they're very confident around the results. So the aim here is to do things properly, generate the right data. This is the sort of thing that pharmaceutical company, if they want to buy such a drug, they want to see this, and they'll then pay. They'll feel much more confident paying top dollar than they will to some half-baked, incomplete. Maybe if we did this trial or did that trial or collected that data, then you'd have something. This is really doing everything properly, setting ourselves up for the maximum type of transaction that can be done. Obviously, this costs more than a phase 1. Phase 2 is more expensive. You need more patients. 32 million is the estimated cost based on 120 patients. This would be international. Obviously, many patients you would want to do them in the markets where you would like to get approval, accelerated approval on. So you can imagine this, the US would be an important market to run trials in. So that's, it sets us up very nicely if all goes well. The AML, this is an interesting one. So we were approached by an investigator after they'd seen the data of late. They were really impressed with bisantrene, and they approached us, an Australian investigator. So these Australian investigators, they've got dozens of clinical trials. They're getting begged on a constant basis by pharmaceutical companies to run trials for them, saying no to everyone. And when they turn up and say, can we get access to bisantrene to run a clinical trial, that they wanted to do a low intensity AML in combination with oral decitabine, which is really compatible with venetoclax. We thought, yes, this is fantastic. This will get us all the way through proof of concept. The cost for 60 patients is $4 million. It's run in Australia. That $4 million then becomes eligible for the R&D tax. So we get, back 43 cents in the dollar on that. So we're talking about $2.5 million to get 60 patients treated in proof of concept in a almost impossible to develop market. Very exciting, very cheap option, and a way of really building on all the clinical data, not only that Ledley collected over the years, but we've recently collected. This is only going to go ahead if the bonus options are taken up by the shareholders, so it's in everyone's hands. The assumption is we have to get 75% take up to be able to run this trial. I'm strongly of the belief that the shareholders will want to see this trial run and will support it. And I'm very excited to see this go forward. I think this has the ability to be a very exciting trial, generate very high quality data, and really get the AML clinical community excited and really do something for patients that need new treatments. Obviously, we have preclinical activities going on. We have a baseline of preclinical activities going on, but if we have more resources, we will do more. The better the quality data set that we can put together preclinically, the more things we can develop, the more value we can build for the shareholders. So this is an investment in the future, an investment that will come back to benefit when we start to talk to partners, talk to regulators. We'll have answers to all their questions rather than saying, oh, actually, we don't know the answer to that one. We'll have to do an experiment. We'll actually have that all in one go. And that really does build trust, understanding and confidence. And ultimately, if you're going to pay a large amount of money for an asset, you really want to know that asset is real. You're not buying something that is, not going to stand up. It's going to have problems later on down the track. So, the more activity we can do now to reassure any potential partner or regulator, the greater value that we build into Race. So what are all the advantages? There's lots of advantages. So we get high quality phase 2 clinical data across all the indications. We generate to the highest possible standard that allows us to have conversations with regulators about accelerated approval. If we don't have that data, we can't even begin those conversations. It really puts together a super valuable, high quality clinical data package across the 3 indications. And that is something that when you go and talk to a potential partner or acquirer, you're really in a strong position, your position of strength, and that's what you want. You don't want to be stuck, or we have to accept whatever the offer is on the table. We can say, no, we're not taking that, come back with something more serious. And the only way you can do that is just to have high quality data and have options other than taking the money or not. We get proof of concept data very early in phase 1, which is unusual. Typically in phase 1, you only get safety. Alone will get efficacy out of phase 1, which is a great thing. We don't have to wait around for many years waiting for results. We'll get it early on, so we know we're on track. And you guys will know we're on track before you're forced to convert your options or chip in any further funds. You know that things are on track and that you're comfortable making that extra investment. We make use of the investigator-initiated trial design so we can actually get access to patients in a really cost-effective way. We'll get other clinicians excited and allow us to build the data package that says this is actually a viable pathway forward. Lays out what we hope is a very clear plan that builds on all the clinical and preclinical history, all the resources that Race has, all the understanding, experience, all our KOL support, really brings it together in a prudent way, stepwise, only committing to what we have funds for, and really making sure that we de-risk everything as much as we possibly can whilst maximising the possible return. So this plan was not just thrown together quickly. I know many of you would have liked to have had this out sooner, It took a long time for us to make sure that all the components were checked off through KOLs, through clinicians, through other consultants. Everything was costed out. That we actually have a plan that's viable. We don't want to come back to you 6 months' time and say, "Oh, sorry, this is not going to work. We're going to have to do something different." Get it right. Build the right strategy, collect the right data, and take Race forward. It sort of lays out this in a nice little sort of graphical, so I'll jump over this, but it's really about building what we need to be able to negotiate from a position of strength, which I should point out can happen because of the history of bisantrene. It's an unusual drug. It's kind of both new drug and an old drug at the same time. And that really does change the sort of risk profile compared to a normal new drug, which is very unknown about what's going to happen when you get to humans. The risk's very high. In many ways, we kind of have all the benefits of an old plus all the benefits of a new. And that really does change, means that a transaction or a partnership can occur really basically at any stage. And as long as we're able to negotiate from a position of strength, we're in a position to be able to make those sorts of discussions and decisions. I've been talking for quite some time, so I might actually turn it over to Pete, and he can take you through the bonus option offer, which is going to be responsible for, if with your support, paying for a lot of this activity.
All right. Well, thanks for that. If you can flick on to the next slide, Daniel. Yeah, so we've been thinking about how to finance this. Again, just to really stress that the core phase 1a/b trial is funded from existing resources. And a part of the thinking here was that given the really quite stunning result from the SHIBA-2 trial, that it just felt wrong for us not to be in a position to move forward on AML. And obviously there's a lot of background history to that. So we were thinking about how to finance this. Clearly, the market is not receptive to dilutive financings. And so we've chosen to go down the path of a bonus option. So you will have seen all the details for this. So the first one is the initial bonus option, which will be raising roughly $6 million. So that's priced at 75 cents, and that's 1 for 20. And there's a 6-month runway on that before those options need to be converted. So there's a long period of time for people to think about the value of these options. If a bonus option is converted, then there are 3 what are referred to as piggyback options only come into being on that initial conversion. They will be at $1.25, and we're out until middle of 2026 before they need to be converted. So there are options. They have a value even now, but obviously investors will want to know that they're in the money at some point in the future. So those are the bonus options, and the thinking behind that is that we can use the initial option conversion to fund AML and some very important work, additional work around the N6A story, for example. And then assuming things go well, and hopefully at some point the sun will begin shining on biotech again, then we potentially have a mechanism here that guarantees the funding beyond the next clinical study, which would put us in a very, very rare position. Biotechs generally fund 1 trial at a time. So we felt it was it's not innovative in the sense that it has been done before and it's worked successfully before, but we felt this was an appropriate way where it's a staged way of funding the future and really enhancing the story. We feel as a management team, as a board, that raising this money is going to add value to shareholders over and above where we're spending the existing pool of capital. So next slide. So this is the use of funds. I won't go through this in detail. Daniel's been through the different clinical phases, but very importantly, these are the things that are separate to the phase 1a/b trial. These are the additional ones, and obviously there's the R&D tax rebate that is supporting this throughout. So next slide. And the timetable, as a matter of public record, I won't go through this now. Next slide, Daniel. Okay. So I'll run through the summary as well, Dan. So again, just really want to stress that the phase 1a/b trial is fully funded. The fundamental shift in the strategy was to broaden out from breast cancer and to ensure that we could actually run this trial in Australia, where there is lower cost and the advantage of the R&D tax credit, and then a clear plan, if supported by shareholders, to progress into phase 2, but also to be looking at opportunities in AML, again, emphasizing that this has been very, very much triggered by the Sheba data. I don't necessarily think that we would be able to, that we would have been able to have done AML until we had that study and those stunning results with that 40% response in that very, very late advanced stage patient group. We will be looking at, obviously this will be driven by data. So in the phase 1, we'll be getting data on cardioprotection. We will be seeing efficacy. Clearly, we will not be able to compare against a blinded group in a phase 1, but we will be getting at least some sense of which patient populations, which cancers are most responsive. And that will then inform the design of the phase 2 trials going forward. So there is going to be a lot of data coming out from those early trials. And importantly, it'll be acting as a bridge between the legacy data of bisantrene and the new RC220 formulation. And we started right at the beginning by talking about team. Obviously, Daniel and I are looking forward to continuing to work together, but we really do have an excellent team on the clinical side, but also on the preclinical research at Race. And the more resources we have to support that team, I think the more exciting data they're going to be able to generate for us. And we can talk a little bit more about that. So that's a summary. There are some additional slides in the deck, which I urge you to have a look at, some additional information. But I think we can close out the formal part of the presentation there.
Okay, well, thank you, Pete. Thank you, Daniel. With that, we will open up the floor to questions. A reminder, if you'd like to ask one, pop your question in using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We've got an awful lot in the queue. Thanks to all those who've submitted one already and for your interest. So we might start here, and possibly this one might be for Pete. So what barriers remain for announcing partnerships involving upfront payments, milestones, and leading to M&A activity?
Yeah, great. Actually, Daniel, do you want to stop sharing the screen? We can do that. So I think it mentioned, I've spent a lot of my time over the years involved in business development campaigns. It's actually part of the business that I absolutely love. So I'm looking forward to getting going on that. Maybe just to back up a little bit. So what Race is doing now with RC220 clearly is going to be much more attractive to a pharma partner. Long IP protection and a much broader patient population. So I think that's very important to stress. We will be seeking to position Race RC220 as an Abraxane-like product. So if people are familiar with Abraxane, it was a reformulation of paclitaxel or branded Taxol, and it was easier to administer. It was less painful to administer. It also drove higher efficacy, and we see a lot of parallels between that story. And I know the Abraxane story extremely well. I was on a board with Carlo Montagna, who was involved in developing that drug. So in terms of business development, it's about crossing bridges, and I think getting the IP filed, having the safety data, getting into the clinic. These are all things that add value to the product itself, and therefore add value to what we're going to achieve in terms of a transaction. And I'm not saying that any part of the process waits for any of those bridges to be crossed. No. Business development is an enduring dialogue between the company that's seeking to license out or sell and pharma and specialty pharma. And these are based on relationships that you build for years. I've been doing deals in the oncology space for years, so I know who to talk to. I know who's likely to be interested. And I think it was a question about ongoing interactions with pharma. If someone said, "Oh, we're not actually talking to pharma at the moment," they should be thrown out of the company. We will always be talking to pharma. We're not going to tell you who we're talking to. We're not going to breach any CDAs or confidences, but those conversations are ongoing. So I've had people contacting me going, "All right, okay, what are you doing at Race, Pete? Tell us about that." So it really is about relationship building. And as I said, and I think Daniel mentioned this, it's all about balancing the desire to do a deal today with getting the optimal value package. And the more data we have, the easier it's going to be. So that's really where it is. And I think also there are quality elements here. And I've been, I don't know how many times in a room where you've got 15 people heading up things like toxicology, CMC, clinical, stats, regulatory, the list goes on. You've got to have absolutely everything right to get a deal over the line. And I think going down the path, even though it's not necessary, but I think it's highly desirable to have an IND open, even if we don't need it to do a trial in Australia. So open an IND. The manufacturing is already at a standard that would be appropriate for a phase 3 or a registration trial. So again, we're ticking that box, because I can tell you what, the two people you fear most in those business development meetings are the toxicology people and CMC. So you've got to get those both right. And I think, very quickly, we should be bridging between that legacy data, which, as we touched on, we can't actually use that data for a regulatory filing. But those 1,500 patients who've been treated, that's very, very important data when we're talking to pharma. It gives that confidence. We know the molecule, we know the safety, the side effects, we know it has activity. Now we're really proving out these new high-value propositions of using cardiotoxicity to be able to drive greater efficacy by either going for higher intensity chemotherapy or extending chemotherapy. The issue with the anthracyclines is virtually nobody gets the optimal therapeutic dose, and that's something that I think we can achieve with bisantrene. So a bit of a long round.
No patient these days gets optimal dosing. Every patient that gets anthracycline is underdosed for anti-cancer treatment because of the consequences of damaging the heart. Because if you treat the cancer most effectively, you will damage the patient's heart, and that's well known.
And just another thing to throw in the mix there. We talked about potentially segmenting deals, which is challenging. You can't really sell the same molecule twice, but you can do things like regional deals. And you have seen on that slide the huge number of doses of anthracyclines that are administered in China, for example. I think that would be that's going to be a very fertile hunting ground for us when we're talking about deals and earlier deals. A lot of the Chinese companies will do deals at earlier stages. Pharma may be more cautious, or are likely to be more cautious, but I think big pharma will be. But looking at something like China and an early deal there, I can think off the top of my head of a number of examples that are very relevant to what Race is doing.
Thank you. Okay, we've got lots of other questions in this lot about doing deals and partnering, but we'll try to honour some of the others as well. So let's move to one here. How do we know that any of the trials will be able to recruit patients? Which is a decent question.
Okay, let me.
Yeah, I got to say, because we did the research to make sure this was the case. So you go out, you speak to the clinicians, you speak to the people who run these trials, and you find out what they can recruit to. We have an advantage that we're going all solid tumours. So we're not in a particular narrow indication with only a very small number of patients. It's basically any patient that gets an anthracycline, which is a huge patient population. So it's much easier to recruit when there's a lot of patients out there than it is when there's a very small number of patients. If we were going for some tiny subgroup of some rare kidney disease, then that can be really difficult. But if you're going any patient, lung, doesn't really matter, it could be any particular cancer, then the problem becomes a lot simpler.
Yeah,
But
and
we've done the homework.
Yeah, these types of trials are much more usual, and it's not infrequent to see an all-comers trial. So basically, it'll be any anthracycline, any patient who's going to be getting anthracycline or anthracycline-containing regimen, could be eligible for this. So, yeah, as Daniel said, it takes time to identify the clinicians. You've got to get in their diaries. You've got to talk to them. And as we started with metastatic breast cancer in Australia, it became quite apparent that metastatic breast cancer, whilst it would be a lovely bridge to earlier stage breast cancer, that actually the number of patients that we'd be able to recruit there would be limiting. Therefore, went on and started looking at ovarian, sarcoma, and other cancers. So those are most likely to be the areas where we're going to be recruiting additional patients. So it did take time. We were very anxious to get the new strategy out, but again, we can't go out and then all of a sudden do an about face, because we realized that the feasibility study just says, we're not going to be able to recruit.
Okay, thanks. So just a question here around, so what role has the CMO played in the design of the trials discussed today?
Which have been leading it. So Michelle, who will be with us for the AGM next week, has been leading that, working with Michelle, Marinella, and Sophia. So a great team of people who've been putting a lot of work into this. So, I've been focusing more on the financial side to make sure that it's affordable. So Michelle's been absolutely driving this.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, so question for you. In the SPP, so the share purchase plan 2 years ago, we were told that the funds raised would help us generate data to get to marketing and a potential transaction. 2 years later, we're raising it again, and the timeline's now extended by another 2 to 3 years. How can we be confident that the M&A work will happen in or before this 2 to 3 year window?
In a way, my rather long rambling answer to the first question, I think hopefully would answer that. I think the important thing is to bridge between historic data and the new data, and the cardioprotection is going to be a very, very important part of this. Dan talked about the VO2 peak and a lot of other biomarkers around cardioprotection. We know that there is toxicity even with the first dose of anthracycline. We'll be able to spot that, and basically each patient is effectively their control. We'll do baseline measurements of all of the biomarkers and VO2 peak, and then look at that patient after they've received treatment. And obviously there'll be varying doses of bisantrene going into that study as part of the dose escalation. So we should be getting data on that cardioprotection as well, and that's, as I said, that's then the gateway to being able to go in with higher doses of anthracycline. And I think at that point, it becomes clear that this can be another Abraxane, which I think from memory was, got up to $1.5 billion in sales. Celgene bought Abraxis, now that's with BMS. I think, you can never say with 100% confidence, because anything that involves a third party signing on a piece of paper, we don't have control over. But I think lining up all of these key components that are going to be driving interest, that's what this strategy is all about. And we will be getting data quite quickly out of the phase 1 trial on all of these key aspects. I mean, first of all, safety, which is the main reason for the trial, but then there's all this other data that comes out of the trial.
Yeah, I also think one of the things that's happened since the SPP was the discovery of RC220, and that really changed everything. This added more value. RC220 has added more value to race than anything else, but it comes with a consequence of that is we can't do the things we were going to do before using the old formulation, because we'd throw all that information, all of that out the window. So we'd spend all this money running clinical trials using RC110, and then have to repeat all those trials again with RC220, which is not a very good use of shareholder funds. So whilst it means there's a delay and things haven't gone as quickly as we would all like, it means that we've been more cost effective at not wasting. So I'm not sure the shareholders would have liked us to spend all the money and then be coming back to them asking for another $50–60 million because we blew it all running trials for a drug that we can't sell. So and we have to be prudent about these sorts of things, and yeah, that's really a major factor. So I think the importance of RC220 really cannot be overemphasized. It's transformational to the value of race. It allows us to do so many things we couldn't do previously. For example, we wouldn't be able to run the trials we're thinking of running here in Australia if we were doing it with 110. It's just we could not recruit the patients. So we wouldn't be able to get access to the R&D tax, which would then double the cost of the trials or more, triple the cost of the trials. There's a whole bunch of factors that really all play into one another that are really super important to take into account. So the past is the past. Unfortunately, things have not turned out in some ways, but in other ways, we've got really lucky in a lot of other areas. To try to develop RC220 was a major breakthrough. Ledley tried for a decade to make a drug like RC220 and failed. It basically was, they abandoned bisantrene because they couldn't really solve the problem of precipitation. We've been able to solve what they couldn't do, and I'm really proud of the team for being able to do that. It's not an easy problem to solve. So the shareholders are very lucky to have the people working for Race they have. So don't jump up and down and get angry if they get options, that's for sure. They more than deserve it, every single one of them.
You're talking about the team in the engine room. So yeah.
Yes, yeah, the people who are actually doing it on the ground. So those people really, they have worked their backsides off over the last few years to generate an amazing opportunity for the shareholders. And as a shareholder, I feel, extremely happy with what they've done.
Yeah, they work very hard. Okay, so moving on. For RC220 phase 1AB trial, how do you recruit for any trial? Wouldn't you have to sponsor trials for specific cancers?
Yeah, again, there was a time when you'd only go in for a single indication, and then with, I think it was really the targeted therapies, you go in, you'd say anyone with a particular mutation may respond to this PI3 kinase inhibitor or whatever it may be, and therefore you had these sort of umbrella trials. And as I said, even with early chemotherapeutics, it was not unusual to be recruiting a mix of late stage patients who had particular criteria. So the limitation is about how this gets communicated to clinicians, and that's obviously a big part of the role of the team and of CROs. So it's really about getting out there. So whilst it's open to all, there will be specific focus areas of focus. So ovarian, sarcoma, breast cancer, etc. So we will be using this time between now and the start of that trial to be getting the message out there and talking to different clinicians. As I said, they do form discrete groups. It is a very specialized area. So you have people who specialize in sarcoma, breast cancer, etc. So as I said, it sounds like we're going to be talking to everybody. No, we're going to be focusing on specific cancers where we feel we're most likely to recruit, but equally, if other people know about the trial, they will be able to refer a patient with a cancer we haven't necessarily focused on ourselves. It's all to do with resources and time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge what we're actually looking at is the damage the anthracyclines have to the heart. So it doesn't matter what cancer the patient has, their heart is still damaged exactly the same way. Whether they've got ovarian cancer or breast cancer, their heart gets damaged in the same way. That's what we're looking at. So the actual, effectively from the cancer perspective, it's irrelevant. Just as long as they're being treated with an anthracycline, they will suffer that damage the same. So whilst it might look like it's any patient, it's actually specifically narrowed down because of the question that we were asking. It's any patient who's getting an anthracycline and will be suffering heart damage, potentially. Well, almost certainly is probably the answer to say that all patients are damaged. It's just the level that varies.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so will shareholders and the market be made aware when the company makes a breakthrough drug designation submission with the FDA?
The answer would be yes. Anything that's price sensitive, then that would be announced. So that's some distance off, so I wouldn't worry. The more important is the FDA IND application will be the first thing that will be going in, and there will be an announcement there. There will be an announcement on the outcome, which is typically 30 days after you submit your IND. And the INDs are funny. There you submit them, and if the FDA says nothing, you hear nothing from the FDA, you go, yay, we're off. It's if they come back with questions that you've got to deal with things. So it's one of these ones where you don't want to hear from the FDA at all. But yes, all of those sorts of things would be announced as per normal. Anything that's price sensitive will get announced.
So while you're on that tangent, perhaps we can just talk about inflection points. And so there's a question here. What inflection points do you expect between now and when RC220 is available for human trials?
That I can't, some of those things I can't tell you because we're talking stuff that hasn't been yet completed and therefore is not ready to be released. So there will be a series of price sensitive announcements we expect over the next, say, 6 months or a bit over 6 months, as that we'll see various progress of the development of RC220 as it completes the various hurdles it has to go through. We'll see a lot of activity going into planning of the clinical trials and those sorts of things. You've got things like ethics applications, CROs being recruited, and all these sorts of things that go into it. There's a lot of activity, a lot of preclinical activity still continuing on at Race. So there is not going to be this information vacuum over the next, say, 8 months, 7 to 8 months. So there'll be lots of activity. And then there's always, with Race, there's always the surprise announcements. I don't know how many of the shareholders predicted that I'd be CEO as before Wednesday. So there's always, Race always expect the unexpected. So, and that will continue.
Great. Okay, nothing price sensitive in this conversation. Thanks. You can keep that up your sleeve.
I think to me the real value coming out prior to the clinical trial is the non-clinical tox package, where we're looking at a combination of bisantrene and doxorubicin. So that, thinking of it from a business development point of view, there's that, and then there's a lot of studies that are ongoing that are preclinical. But some of those are going to be very, very interesting and very relevant to the clinical study.
Yeah, we shouldn't forget that we still have Professor Nagler's Sheba 2 trial that's being presented at ASH beginning of December. That's, I think many shareholders are looking forward to learning more about that. Certainly we are looking forward to learning more about it. We'll continue on. So there'll be various expansions of the various things as we go forward.
And people shouldn't underestimate the importance of CMC announcements. I know they feel like, we just made something, someone's made the compound or this, but these are, as I said, very, very important. It's important from a regulatory point of view, obviously, but it's also very important, again, for partnering, that you're able to meet certain standards with the drug substance itself. So, they can be a bit dry, I know that, but these are important stepping stones.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, so will the investigator-led AML trial have more direct access to recruit and treat patients? Will we be able to get this work achieved in a timely outcome, noting that we haven't announced who the investigator will be at this point in time?
We have, yeah. I was just going to say that the investigator has told us. Yeah.
You go, Daniel. You're the boss.
No. The investigator has come to us and said what he believes he can do. They're very experienced. We've got no reason to doubt. We'll announce as this progresses. There'll be more announcements about that. Unfortunately, it's not our trial. It's their trial. They control it. They do what they want to do. We're there to support them and help them with the drug and help them with the costs involved. But, they will run the trial. They would not come to us I'm very confident they would not come to us unless they believe they could do what they set out to do. There's no point for them doing a trial that won't recruit. So because it's their trial, they've got their patients and they can put their patients into the trial. So very, very different than if you're going begging to an investigator, can you put, and they've got a dozen other trials that are competing for the same patient. It's very difficult to get that. So yeah, otherwise, yeah, I wouldn't think it was a good idea for us to try and run a sponsored trial in Australia. In fact, it would be possible to do, but running an investigator-initiated trial is cost-effective, generates the same similar type of data if it's done well, and really, you know, proves out something that's potentially a great opportunity.
So on the AML spoke still, so in terms of the AML trial, was Sheba considered as an option versus an Australian investigator, given that they know the drug well and have had success in recruiting?
That's up to Sheba. We can't go to Sheba and say, run this trial. The investigator has to come to us with a proposal of the type of trial they would like to run. And then when we get that request, we then consider that and we go for there. If it fits into our clinical development plans, we can afford to fund it. We've got the resources. Obviously, whether we could do that or not would depend somewhat on the uptake of bonus options. So we have to balance up all those particular things. But yeah, it's basically driven by the investigators. I know certainly Professor Nagler and his team there are very excited about bisantrene. They mentioned in their abstract they submitted that they were keen to do further trials. And it would come down to what they would propose and, you know, do we have the resources to support it? It has to be, that's the only way you can approach these things. But it's, I have to say, from the perspective of race, it's great to have multiple investigators want to have your drug and use it in their patients. And the only reason they do that is because it's not for the money, it's for they can help their patients. They believe it'll help their patients.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so will ethics submission for trials be in place before RC220 availability to ensure race can hit the ground running? It's kind of
yes, we will do everything to make sure that everything is as efficient as possible so that trials can start as soon as they possibly can. It's actually quite a lot of complexity around this because there's certain things have to be done in certain orders for, in my opinion, no rational reason, but that's just the way the clinical trial process works. And we will be doing everything in parallel that we can to ensure that we are as far advanced as fast as we possibly can to get this underway. I don't want us see us waste a single day. This is not just from the perspective of shareholders, it's from the perspective of patients. Every day we delay is a patient that misses out on potentially a life-saving treatment. And, you know, we can't afford to just take it easy, and we won't.
Okay, thank you. So on that point, other than available funding, what's preventing the AML phase 2 trial commencing in parallel to the phase 1A/B trial now to shorten the runway to completion, given the AML results have been so successful to date? If it's just down to funding, could it be put to shareholders to fund this sooner if the appetite is there? Pete?
The two trials are running in parallel. So the phase 1 solid tumour and the AML will both go at the same time. The limiting factor at the moment is access to RC220 and, of course, for AML, the funds. But we will know the outcome of the bonus option and whether we have the funds to support the AML before that, before the trial, the AML trial kicks off. So,
and there was the thought of starting something. You know, this is going back a while, but there was the thought of starting an AML trial using the old RC110 formulation. But when we actually looked at it, it really didn't end up with delivering data any quicker going down that path. So the decision was made to use RC220 for that trial as well. And, you know, the bridge there would be, you know, preliminary safety data from the phase 1, and we'll then be able to start that trial. So it really all relies on the availability of the 220 formulation.
And 110 is not particularly suitable for low intensity protocols because you have to have a central line put in, which is not really what somebody who wants a low intensity protocol wants to have. Like, they're fairly invasive. You just don't want this. It's okay if you're in hospital, in a bed for a week or something like this, getting treated, because there's less inconvenient. But if you're an outpatient and you're coming in just to get treated, you go home, having a central line is not ideal, to say the least. So, yeah. So it's just, as a low intensity protocol, RC220 is really the only viable strategy. And it's up to the investigator. That's what the investigator wants to use. So, we can't just say, I'll use 110, and they go, no, it's my trial. This is what I want. Are you happy to supply it? And we go, we consider it, and that's what we make the decision.
Thank you. Okay, I'm conscious we're getting pretty close to time. I've still got a whole load of questions in this list, including some that have come through via email as well. So if we don't get to your questions, and in some cases, quite a few questions from individuals in time, then we will get back to you in other ways. But Daniel, perhaps you can answer this so that people aren't sort of concerned about it. So, personal question, but if Daniel is full-time CEO, has he relieved himself from his other business responsibilities? We've had a few like this, because we don't want to burn him out. So could you talk to that?
Well, the reality was previously I was 3/4 time, but in reality I was 150% time. That's just my nature. I'm someone who's very hardworking, I suppose, and I've basically sacrificed my other commitments to focus on race and make sure race is done correctly. So I have the advantage of being somewhat efficient as well, so I can get through a lot, but still, so I've made that decision. So I hope the shareholders, certainly my wife doesn't think it's a great idea, because she's carrying a lot of the cost of this. But this is something I think is important. There's a need there that this is done, and it needs a full-time CEO. And so either I take on the role as CEO full-time, or I don't. And given the need and what race requires at the moment, there's nothing really other than do what needs to get done. So put race first and me second, personally. Hopefully it'll pay off in the long run. That's the thinking anyway.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. So on the options, a few questions on options here. The ability to deliver race's strategy relies solely on the issuance of the new options. If current market conditions prevail and the options are not in the money at expiry, what is the alternative, given there is no value driving clinical news in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so as hopefully we've made clear during the presentation, the critical data that's really needed, when we're thinking about partnerships, future fundraisings as well, if necessary, is the phase 1A/B trial as that bridge between the legacy data and today. And what we're really, I guess, appealing to shareholders today is laying out the vision of what can be achieved with those bonus options if shareholders deem it sensible to participate. So, but again, really emphasize that this has all been driven by ensuring that we don't need additional funding from shareholders to get to the critical, if you like, the critical path data, which is that safety, early signs of efficacy, and cardiac protection for RC220. That is, as I said, it's a huge change. RC220 is so much more valuable than the early formulations of Bisantrene. So I feel very confident. There was actually a question that made me smile about, we've had a 3-pillar strategy, we had a 5-pillar strategy. How do we know
strategy?
How do we know this one's going to stick? I think hopefully people see that the way that this is planned in terms of the financing and the execution of the clinical plan, that this just makes sense. I think there are elements of it where it's, well, let's see what the data tells us. We can't fully design a phase 2 trial until we know what the phase 1 tells us. But I think this is a strategy that is going to stick. Everyone in the company's bought into it, board's bought into it. So I think hopefully, we will have now a period of much greater stability as we get on and execute. That's what I've been paid for in my career to do, is to execute. Sometimes you get an answer you don't like, but you get an answer. That's what my job is. That's what Daniel's job is, to make sure we get an answer.
Yeah, I also think it's really, we laid out a very new strategy at the end of 2021, which was around cardio protection. This is basically just a refinement of that strategy. The only difference really that's changed is the development of RC220, which has allowed us to do things in a different way than we would have done if we had only RC110. But once we had RC220, that allowed us to really fine tune and maximize value. So whilst we might think like we've been going here, there, and everywhere, we've actually been on the same path, going the same way. We've just been getting better and better as things have progressed. So I think as data comes in, we've got better results and better opportunities.
If I just answer one question, it was actually the first question, but are directors able to purchase shares on market prior to the bonus share issue next Wednesday? I was going to answer yes, but I actually thought it was prudent to check with the company secretary, and he said, I'll get back to you. So I think it's yes, but treat it as maybe for the time being. And I apologize. I've actually got to run to another meeting. So Jane, if I think we are at the top of the hour, a little late.
We are at the top of the hour. So with that, I will just say thanks to both of you for all your time, and to all the many shareholders that were online with us today for your participation and great questions. And we'll get back to those of you that we haven't followed up with today. So
maybe on the Investor Hub, so everyone can see them.
On the Investor Hub, and also for anyone that can come to the AGM next week. We look forward to seeing you either in person or online. So with that, thank you.
Great.
And
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.